All right, so let's talk about the natural sciences versus the social sciences. First, for the layman, what is the difference? They both have science in it, Gad. Come on.
Right. So the lay person will often use these sort of simplifying heuristics to determine what is science versus not. If you're wearing a lab coat, if you have a petri dish, right? If you have a couple of chemical formulas, that's science. Because to the average lay person, that's impenetrable. On the other hand, most people have, for example, a folk psychology. They have an innate sense of what psychology is. And therefore, to the extent that they feel that they could contribute, even though they might be lay people, somehow that's less impenetrable to them.
Right.
So they then will create this false dichotomy where chemistry and physics, that's real science, but sociology, it's for people who couldn't hack it in physics. The reality is that the only difference is what are the phenomena that you're studying across these two general rubrics of science. In the social sciences, you're studying psychology, anthropology, economics, sociology. It could be as rigorous as the natural sciences. So let me give you an example. If you're a sociologist, you could study sociometry, which is, for example, how does power diffuse within a network? And you could use very fancy mathematics, graph theory, to try to understand this. So the type of mathematical modeling that you would use to study how power diffuses within a network is actually a very fancy mathematical approach. But sociology has somehow been co-opted by the activists, right?
Yeah.
And so we then view it as being less scientific. But sciences simply means adhering truthfully to the scientific method. I posit a hypothesis. I think about the data that I would need to collect that would either falsify or not a hypothesis. I collect that data. I apply some sort of statistical analysis, some mathematical analysis to analyze the data, and then I go one way or the other. That could be just as applied if it's in economics or if it is in physics. So it is wrong, because I often get letters and emails from people asking me, well, is psychology really a science? I mean, of course it's a science.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, what is more laudable than studying the most important organism that we know, called humans, right?
Yeah.
So it's not as though by the sheer nature of what physicists study, they are real scientists, but the sociologist is not. And by the way, I'm not trying to defend sociologists here, because I'm the one who's criticizing sociologists. But
Right.
Usually I'm criticizing them for deviating from the scientific method. What makes them less scientists is that they become activists and not scientists. But you could be just as much as a scientist if you study something in business or if you study something in chemistry.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about activists, not scientists, because that's what I've been saying about journalists. These people are not doing true journalism and fact-finding anymore and reporting based on evidence. What they're doing is letting their own biases slam right into the middle of this thing.
And so one of the things that I will say differentiates the natural sciences from the social sciences, and that's very much at the heart of the work that I do. The natural sciences have organized trees of knowledge. So in physics, people agree on a set of core knowledge that at this point has become unassailable. Notwithstanding the fact that they still have the epistemic humility to say, oh, if new provision, it's only provisional. If something now falsifies it, I'm willing to revise it.
Right.
But there is,
but the bedrock.
The bedrock is there. There's core knowledge that is now unassailable in physics and chemistry. There aren't chemists who are for the periodic table and chemists who are against it.
Right.
Therefore, you could build coherent trees of knowledge, or the term that I love to use, which was reintroduced into the common lexicon by E.O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist at Harvard, is consilience, unity of knowledge. So the natural sciences, by the nature of how they test theories, have these organized trees of knowledge. That's what's lacking in the social sciences. And the reason it's lacking is not because the social sciences are any less scientific, it's because it is easier for ideologies to creep into the social sciences, right? So if I'm a libertarian or a Marxist, I might study economics in a way that is very polluted by my personal ideology. So it's not that the social sciences are epistemologically any inherently less scientific than chemistry. It's that biases are easier to creep in.
Yeah, it's funny because I'll hear, and I talk to sometimes, someone's a leftist economist or a libertarian economist or whatever it is, and I always think it's kind of funny, like we all have our own beliefs. Economically, I'm a little more libertarian these days, but if you're studying something within the window of the way you want it to be, it's by default is going to be a little screwy.
Absolutely. And as I said, it is naturally more difficult for your personal ideological biases to come into something that you're studying in organic chemistry. Although I should mention that there have been famous cases where even hard sciences have been deeply polluted by ideologies. So Lysenko was a Russian or Soviet Union geneticist who proposed a theory of genetics that he thought was more in line with Marxist philosophy. That was a wrong theory of genetics that led to massive famine and to the death of millions of people. So even, it's not as though hard scientists are inoculated from the possibility of being parasitized by some of these ideological biases.
Do you think it's too late for the hard sciences to be protected? Like, is it too late for them to turn their force field on? Because we do see this creeping now in biology. I mean, Brett Weinstein's been talking about this now, that now it's really reaching its hand into that, which could have horrific repercussions for society.
Well, listen, when a scientist in the 21st century, I'm speaking of myself right now, has to appear in front of the Canadian Senate to argue that there is such a thing as male and female, and that evolutionary biology is based on the recognition that there is sexual dimorphism in human. Sexual dimorphism is a fancy term for saying basically that there are evolved sex differences. Humans, males are bigger than females, right? That's a sexual dimorphism. So the fact that I have to appear in front of the Canadian Senate to actually argue these things demonstrates how far the snake has gone into the den.
Yeah, so in a weird way, your position as a evolutionary biologist is sort of right at the front of the type of person that this ideology would attack, right?
Just to correct, I'm an evolution psychologist.
Psychologist, sorry.
I apply
not
evolutionary biology.
I just said biologist, sorry.
Although I apply evolutionary biological principles.
Sorry.
It's craziness, right? And the reason why I'm so, if you like, aware of the epistemological dichotomy between the natural and social sciences is because my scientific career of 20 plus years has really been straddling both these fields, right? I apply evolutionary biology to study consumer behavior. Consumer behavior would be construed as something within the social sciences. Evolutionary biology is something that is within the natural sciences. So I really am very much steeped in both cultures. And I see the extent to which it is easier for people to succumb to their personal biases in the social sciences. Let me just give you one example. If you start off with the premise that you can't agree on whether there is such a thing as innate sex differences or not, how could you from that starting point ever build a tree of knowledge that's organized? If at this most fundamental level we can't agree that there is such a thing as male or female, then we're done, we're cooked. Physicists don't suffer from that problem, and that's why they make much better progress than social scientists do.